This is Hannibal back here from the HannibalTV.com. I just finished watching the Chris Adams Dark Side of the Ring. It, I think it's tied with the Buff Bagwell one of being my favorite or second favorite of the season. Which, by the way, Jack Kilby did an interview with Buff Bagwell a couple of days ago right here on the Hannibal TV. If you want to check it out, he does talk about his Dark Side of the Ring. And of course, I did a review of that one on there. I should say for the Dark Side of the Ring one, though, I'm just going to make a quick detour for the Buff Bagwell one. When he was talking to Jack Kilby, he denied Scorpio's story where Scorpio was saying that he was small down there, which you know where I'm talking about. But he did not deny that his mother shaved his balls. So take that for what it's worth. That was a very disturbing part of the Bagwell one. And of course, that Chris Colt Dark Side of the Ring last week is still disturbing me. You have a guy that looks basically like worse than Bushwhacker Luke, and I like Bushwhacker Luke, but it's like the amount of time they spent on Chris Colt doing porn and the clips that they showed in the last week's episode, that it's just something I never want to see again. So disgusting. And gay porn at that. And I'm not gay, so that makes it even me want to see it even less. All those clips. But as far as the Chris Adams Dark Side of the Ring, I'm very familiar with Chris Adams' story. I actually know James Beard very well. He was in this. I used to do a podcast with James Beard. Tom Lance and I used to be very close friends. He's featured in this a lot. Jeannie Clark, Steve Austin and Billy Jack Haynes' ex-wife. I've known her for many years. There's about 3 or 4 interviews with her on this channel if you want to know more about her. And she does talk about Chris. If you search up Jeannie Clark, Chris Adams, the Hannibal TV, you can hear her go into a lot more detail in various clips on this channel about their relationship. There's a couple of stories on the one funny thing on this is Kevin Von Erich telling the story about Chris Adams beating up his driver once for being late and getting him into trouble for that. And it's funny. I love Kevin Von Erich, but it's funny when he's saying that we had a strict rule of you had to be at the building an hour ahead of time. When Kevin Von Erich, um, if you look at the history towards the later years of World Class, one of the reasons why they had issues was for Von Erichs no showing their own events, and Kevin was one of them that would not only show up late but no show. And Jerry Jarrett confirmed that in the interview with me. But of course, Kevin turned his life around. But that's one story. Then there's the story that he headbutted a pilot on a trip, I believe, back from Puerto Rico. They ended up getting jail time for. He had a serious drug and alcohol problem that's well documented. He cheated. I mean, he was a ladies' man, and he was young in those days, and world class wrestling was incredibly popular. He started in England. His brother was a 2-time Olympic silver medalist in judo. He did judo as well, but he wasn't as successful as his brother, so he went into British wrestling, where he started using Jeannie as his valet. And she went on to be Lady Blossom in WCW. Then he came to the US, started wrestling, had his most success in the Dallas territory. As far as the super kick goes, he's the first person I know of to use the super kick. And back when he used it, it wasn't like you watch WWE or AEW now. I remember last year's WrestleMania. The reason I didn't watch night 2, because night 1 you had the Usos against Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, and there must have been 40 super kicks in that match, all with very obvious leg slaps. When Chris Adams did it, it was before the internet, so not everybody knew the trick of the leg slap, and not you didn't see the these super kicks done in every match, so it was still impressive. But he should probably be credited with inventing the super kick. Even when Shawn Michaels did it, I mean, it wasn't overused like it is today, which today it's one of my least favorite moves in wrestling, just because everybody knows about the leg slap trick. So at one point, he goes to WCW, where they say he was a jobber, but he probably made a lot of money. I think the minimum contract in WCW was 150,000, so he probably made more in WCW than he did in World Class. Um, but yeah, I do remember him being a low card guy in WCW, but he did have some good matches. According to Tom Lance, he was released from WCW due to getting a DUI while under contract with the company. He ended up living with a fan, Boo Ray, who was a friend of Tom Lance's. I have heard through the grapevine though, honestly, and Boo Ray even says he was a when Chris was living with a girl in Boo Ray's house, because I guess Boo Ray took him in because he's a super wrestling fan that had some money. I mean, a girl overdosed on GHB, which was a popular drug back then for wrestlers. But I have heard through people in Texas when I was wrestling in Texas that Boo Ray was also a drug user and partier. And that's one of the reasons why Chris liked living there and why Boo Ray liked having Chris because they partied together. Like that just makes sense. So they do make, there's always a narrative they want to get across in these dark side of the rings, and they try and make this Blu-ray look innocent. But from what I hear, he was a partier as well. And then again, he was a wrestling fan. So yes, Chris probably took advantage of him for sure. But he wasn't this innocent guy that lived a clean life and didn't do drugs. He may not have done GHB, but I'm positive he did other stuff from the stories I've heard. Too many people told me, um, and I won't get into the stuff that they said, but of course they tell a story on here that Chris once ripped out Rod Price's hair in a match in Texas. I think it was Global Wrestling, and he had to get something like 200 stitches. I'd have to ask Rod about that. Um, don't deny that something like that happened, but it seems a bit exaggerated for 200 stitches. He also supposedly beat up one of his wives. Uh, they go into the feud that he had with Steve Austin. He did train Steve Austin, which Steve will say he didn't train him that well, but he did get Steve Austin over with a feud with Steve Austin being managed by his ex-wife, Lady Blossom, who in the clips in this show did really well on the mic, I thought. And then Chris's current wife at the time, Tony, and Chris and Lady Blossom had a kid together, so they were still on speaking terms. Jade, and she did well in this episode. I thought she came across well. They also had Chris Adams' brother on this show, the judo champion, that was very well spoken. He said he thinks there's more to the killing. Basically, what happened was Chris was, I guess, doing drugs and drinking heavily. Alcohol's a terrible drug. It can screw people up and make people black out. There's no doubt that most of Chris Adams' incidents had to do with alcohol, and then if he's throwing narcotics into the mix, which, from what I understand, he was. That's just a recipe for someone going crazy, and that's what happened at some point. I get Who knows the real version of the story, but there was partying going on at Bourré's house, and Bourré ended up shooting Chris Adams after Chris Adams attacked Bourré. So I don't think it was any type of premeditated murder, 100%. Um, who knows what happened? I guess only Chris and Bourré know the real story, but as far as I know, Bourré wasn't found guilty of anything. But yeah, the only thing I'll say about Bourré is he wasn't innocent, I don't think. If you have Chris Adams living with you for an extended period of time, and even at one point his girlfriend also living with you, and he's a known alcoholic and drug user, I don't think that Bourré is as innocent as far as not being a partier as they made him out to be in this. But yeah, good episode overall. Chris Adams, certainly, they all said he had a Jekyll and Hyde side. David Manning was in this too, former world-class referee. And a lot of people have that when they get under the influence of stuff. He didn't get control of it. We mentioned Kevin Von Erich had issues. He got control over his issues. I did see at one point an interview recently with Fritz talking about Kevin. He hated doing jobs and he hated losing in anything, including in life. And that's probably one of the reasons Kevin did get clean. He wanted to be a winner, and he ended up a winner in the end. Chris Adams um, had so many warning signs that he was he was going downhill, and like all these incidents of arrests and stuff related to alcohol, but he didn't take them. So it's unfortunate. He never reached his full potential as a wrestler, and it's just too bad because he was very talented and he was an innovator. I'm just going to I do have a clip that the Chris Adams documentary maker let me post of Chris Adams killer talking about killing Chris Adams that I'll put in the comments right now. I should have put this in the description, but I'll put it up on the screen. If you click on this link, it's Chris Adams Killer Blu-ray telling the story of killing Chris Adams. Steve Austin really bashes Chris Adams in his book. There's obviously ended up being real heat there. But I will say one thing. Steve Austin was the number one. I think he won the Wrestling Observer Award for being Rookie of the Year when he debuted. Chris Adams really gave him a monster push right out of the gates. He may not have made a lot of money, but he got a buzz about him thanks to Chris Adams, where not a lot of wrestling teachers do that. I certainly can't say I had that. Um, but yeah, I would definitely say that Chris Adams helped get Steve Austin over and helped get him on WCW's radar because Steve didn't spend long on the independents, and he ended up being one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And if Chris hadn't introduced Steve to Lady Blossom, Jeannie Clark ended up coming up with the Stone Cold name for Steve Austin. So there was a lot of elements in Steve's career that wouldn't have happened without Chris Adams. Hello, Alfred. Chris wrestled in the Maritime. Got to have a few drinks with him, Big Chris. I had no idea Chris wrestled in the Maritimes. That's very interesting. What year would that have been? Giant Gonzalez, pancake eating Piper is doing well. I'll be seeing her on Friday. My foot injury is improving, so hopefully I can start having her more and more. I was back deadlifting. I know it sounds small, but I was back deadlifting 225 last night, which from having a shattered heel is a good step in the right direction. 1984, Chris wrestled in the Maritimes. Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for that information, Big Fish. Appreciate it. Let me know what you think about the Chris Adams documentary and if this Blu-ray guy that killed him is as innocent a person as he was made out to be in this documentary.